What I want to talk about here real quick is just a review of the last major foreign policy issues that the United States had to deal with in this topic of foreign policy issues. And we were talking before in the last lecture about the XYZ affair, quasi-war, Jay Treaty, Barbary pirates, the French Revolution. All these things were happening that the United States had to have a process with. Well, after that seems to settle down a little bit, there's going to be something new that happens in Europe, which is that the revolutionary government of France is going to be taken over by a new leader, and that new leader is Napoleon, a member of the French army who has risen in popularity throughout Europe. This particular fellow is going to, between 1796 all the way to 1812, is going to be fighting a war of conquest throughout Europe. Everything you see here that's in the blue right here and the purple are all territories that Napoleon will conquer and add to France. And that's not something the United States was too worried about, because the more Napoleon conquered, the more he wanted to buy raw goods that he needed for his armies and conquests. So the United States was selling quite a lot to him for a while. The British are going to be very concerned, because one of the places that Napoleon is obviously looking to conquer as well is Britain, France's ancient enemy. And so Britain and Portugal and a couple of islands here are going to combine together, and there's going to be this long naval war, like a blockade. I'll show you that picture in a second, all around Europe that's going to be maintained for this decade and a half long war. And then, of course, the British army is going to be moving in to fight Napoleon through Spain and all the way into France. And it's this huge, long event in history. Well, this is the blockade that Britain's going to set up, and they're going to have this blockade set up for quite a long time. The issue with this blockade is that it is expensive for Britain to maintain it, and they're maintaining it because this way, if Napoleon ever tries to get a fleet of warships out with troops on them to invade England, which he tries to do twice, if he does that, this blockade can catch it and stop him, which does happen. So this is a big deal. It's just what happens here, folks, is that this war is going to get in the way of U.S. trade, and it's going to get the United States drawn into a conflict again. And one of the biggest issues is that England does not want American goods eventually, after 1805, getting into any of the French-owned regions, because England is at war with France. So they're going to use the fact that all of Western Europe is blockaded by the English Navy to be a way to stop American ships from coming into the Mediterranean or going straight into France to trade. And that means that that U.S. ships are being either forced to trade with England again or nobody, or U.S. ships, if they try to sneak through the blockade, can be captured, and cargoes will be taken as contraband by England, and sailors from the U.S. merchant ships can be essentially forced to serve in the British Navy. They're going to be essentially imprisoned on British naval vessels. There's a word for this called impressing. To be impressed is basically to be drafted. And although that wasn't something the British normally did to foreign nations, they're doing it to the United States. So this is a really weird era for us, okay? Contentious. The huge battles are going on between the British and the French forces, massive war happening, and the United States is mostly just trying to stay out of it while being able to trade. So a couple of things to know about this. You know, why is the Napoleonic War useful to the United States? One of them, again, is trade, and the other one is the Louisiana Purchase. When Napoleon captures Spain, right here, Napoleon still needs more money that he can use to continue fighting the rest of his wars. And so when he captures Spain, he also captures, through natural progression, all of Spain's colonies for a while. And so he's going to sell this Spanish colony. This French leader is going to sell this Spanish colony to the United States for about $20 million, about $18 million really. And that's going to be great for the United States, because we're going to double the size of the U.S. overnight. That's going to be a big deal. So the United States is not too angry with Napoleon. We're kind of mad at the British for including us in their war against Napoleon by forcing us to not trade with the French. But otherwise, we're enjoying what Napoleon is able to give us, because he needs our money. So a couple of things are going on. as time goes on, the British get more and more punchy with their kidnapping of U.S. sailors. And they're actually going to stop U.S. Navy ships after a while, and they're going to start kidnapping U.S. Navy sailors too, to work on British naval vessels. That's obviously major international incidents happening there, and it's going to be seen very poorly by the American people. And here's one of those encounters: the USS Chesapeake versus the Leopard. The Chesapeake wasn't attacking anybody; it wasn't at war. There was no war between the U.S. and Britain, just kind of a hostile nature. And this British warship called the Leopard pulled alongside the Chesapeake, fired 2 broadsides into it, killing over 40 U.S. sailors. And then they went and it took a few U.S. sailors and forced them to serve on the Leopard. This is a heavy-handed way for the British to treat the United States during this period. And of course, the United States is getting more and more angry over time. Lack of ability to trade because of this blockade that the British have set up. So we're not being allowed to trade with continental Europe, and things like this where the British are kidnapping U.S. sailors. We don't like that at all. There's one more big thing going on, which is held up in this cartoon here, where the British, who are in the Great Lakes region that they're not supposed to be in, they lost that. When the British lost the War of Independence, they lost that territory, but they haven't left it yet, and the United States hasn't really pushed the issue. And so the deal is that the British are still in the Great Lakes region. They're paying natives to attack Americans. And the way the British know that a native has killed an American is when that native brings the scalp of that American to a British officer somewhere in one of the inland fortresses on the frontier, and then the British pay the natives in some manner. And so this is going on as well in the interior. The most violent area is right around where Detroit is today. And so that's where eventually, when we get to the year 1811, the War of 1812, I know it sounds weird, but we call it the War of 1812, even though the hostilities start in 1811, between the British who are in America and the United States. The United States is going to declare this war mostly because we're angry about the way the British are treating us in all the ways I just mentioned. This is the Great Lakes region, and a good portion of this region right down here is owned by the United States, but the British are maintaining a navy on these lakes, and they're maintaining fortresses near the lakes, and they're attacking Americans who are moving into U.S. territory. So obviously, we're going to have to do something about this. So the War of 1812 is all about reopening trade, getting some national pride back because we've been punched around a lot by the British. We don't want the British kidnapping U.S. sailors anymore, so we want that to stop. And of course, there's this side goal that the United States would love to have happen, which is for us to capture Canada. We would love that. And so these are the points of the War of 1812, okay? It's kind of an issue because, of course, Britain is a superpower and they could really hurt us. But here's the deal. If the U.S. loses the War of 1812, the British might take stuff from us like the Louisiana Purchase that we just bought from France. But here's the deal. The only people we're probably going to be fighting if we declare war on Britain are the British troops that are up in Canada and in the Great Lakes. We're probably not going to be fighting Britain itself because Britain is fighting Napoleon. So we're not quite so worried about that when this war starts. It's mostly to secure our people right here in the United States from British attack, which has been going on for some years now. So what are some things we lose in this war? The invasion of Canada is a massive failure. The United States is going to also lose a warship called the Chesapeake, and the United States is going to lose Washington, D.C. When the British invade it, they're going to set fire to the town, including the White House. And so Washington, D.C. is gone. All right, so we do lose those things. The government, of course, is going to get out of the way. It's going to be President Madison is going to run off. And so the deal is, President Monroe, I think, sorry. And so the deal is that we have this situation where the United States loses some territory and loses some hardware here, like the Chesapeake. But our armies are still fighting, and we have a navy, and that navy is out there doing some interesting things. First of all, the United States is actually going to fight a naval battle against the British Navy right here on Lake Erie, and the United States is going to win. That's a big deal because the British Navy is the best navy in the world. So if the Americans can defeat the British, then we feel pretty good about ourselves, right? So getting the British out of the Great Lakes works because they can't maintain their forts here without their Navy. So that works for us. A bunch of ship-to-ship naval battles the United States wins with their larger frigates that they built back during the Barbary War. So the Constitution defeating this British warship called the Guerriere, and the HMS United States defeating the Macedonian, and the Frolic is beaten, and more. And so there's a lot of neat stuff that happens here wherein the United States wins and can claim a certain amount of naval victory against the British, who have been, again, long known to be the best. Now we get here where we have this one big event that I want to mention because it's kind of a big deal to U.S. tradition, is that the British Army, after setting fire to Washington, D.C., is going to go to the city of Baltimore. And the city of Baltimore, I can kind of show you where that is. Whoops. The city of Baltimore is right up here, right there, right up the Chesapeake. So the city of Baltimore has a big hill on it in the seaport, and on that hill is a fortress called Fort McHenry. And the British warships could not fire high enough to, their cannons could not fire higher enough to hit the fortress, and the British needed to knock out the fort if they were going to take the town. The deal is, though, is that the British cannot do so because the fortress is too high. The cannons can't shoot their cannonballs high enough to hurt it. And so they're going to bring out this newfangled rocket that is something the British are trying out during the War of 1812. And they're trying it against Napoleon over in Europe, too. This is a fearsome weapon. Some of them are really big and some of them are really small. The idea is, of course, is that you're firing a rocket with a very interesting kind of gunpowder that's designed to be like a rocket fuel. It's kind of like firework fuel, really, very colorful even. And it fires an explosive warhead at an enemy. The idea that the British have is that they can fire these things up from their ships over the hill, up into the fortress, and down inside of Fort McHenry, where these rockets will blow up and destroy the garrison from the inside out. That's the idea. It's just that these rockets, they were very unwieldy, and when they were fired, they tended to spin around out of control the way a balloon is when you let go of it. It's largely because they fire, these sticks are still attached to them. There's no type of air control at all, no fins or anything like that, no wings. They just kind of fire up and then go crazy and then explode. So they don't actually hurt the fortress at all. And so the Battle of Fort McHenry, which was done with these Congreve rockets, which terrify a lot of Americans who have never seen something like this. These rockets don't really do much damage, and as a result, the British have to evacuate Baltimore, and they continue trying to find ways to defeat us, which is not going to work. There's just not enough British over here in America to actually win a big fight against the United States. And so the war goes on slowly but surely. Well, I should mention, by the way, that these are the rockets that are famous in the national anthem. That line where it says, "The rocket's red glare," that's what they're talking about, the Congreve rocket used against Fort McHenry during the War of 1812. So that's a little bit of trivia for you to use against your friends at sporting events or something. Okay, let's see. What else did I need to show you here? Oh, okay, we're almost done already. Treaty of Ghent is signed in 1814. What is it? Really what happens is that Napoleon in Europe surrenders. The Napoleonic War is over. The British need to stop fighting for a while because they're in kind of deep financial trouble again. And so the British are going to agree to just end the War of 1812 over in America at the same time. So the British simply signed this treaty that basically says that the war doesn't really, no one has to pay reparations for it. Nobody has to call themselves a winner or a loser. And the British agree to actually leave the Great Lakes, which they do. And the British stop kidnapping U.S. sailors, which they do. Now, although this was an agreement in the Jay Treaty many, many years before, the British had never really obeyed this, and they were still attacking us. However, once the War of 1812 was over, the British stopped doing it, which makes Americans feel like they defended themselves against a bully, I guess, right? So although the treaty is signed in 1814, there is an army that has been dispatched, an army of about 15,000 professional British troops that are on their way to the new American Louisiana Purchase, which was lightly defended by the United States. And a British army is on its way, and they can't be recalled. There's no radios. So this British army is on its way to attack the United States. And again, it's strategic. The idea is that maybe the British can attack the French territory we purchased by attacking New Orleans, and then they can have all that territory, and we'd be kind of screwed, right? That's just one of the moves of the War of 1812 that the British decided to go for. And so when this army shows up in New Orleans, although the War of 1812 is over already the previous year, they didn't know it. And so this army attacks. 14,450 British troops attack through the swamps facing the city of New Orleans. And they're going to be, the city is going to be defended by 4,500 Americans. And those Americans are a few U.S. soldiers, a lot of militia that came from the local region, and pirates. There's going to be pirates under control of a pirate captain named Lafitte. And those pirates are going to join us for this battle. And so the end result, because of just bad leadership by the two generals that led this large British army, is that the British lose. They have to retreat. And so America loses 75 soldiers. The British lose 2,000 men and their generals. Both generals are killed. So that just tells you a bit about, well, maybe it's poor leadership on the British side, but on the other end, Americans, oh my gosh, Americans feel like they have really socked the British one. They feel good about this. So in the great game of politics and dealing with bullies, America has really felt like that having a military has done something for them. Andrew Jackson, of course, is now super famous. He's the general that the U.S. had down there in New Orleans to defend it from this British attack, which shouldn't have even happened. So 2,075 people had to die for no reason whatsoever, but America won, and so Americans will basically always see the Battle of New Orleans as the moment where they showed the British what for. I'll just give you the old colonial term. We don't need to worry about that for this lecture. So in results of the War of 1812, Americans proved that they can fight the British and win a few times. Americans are now thinking about westward expansion. The Americans have forced the British to stop kidnapping our sailors. We now have a national anthem because a guy named Francis Scott Key was watching that attack on Baltimore. And so he wrote that poem that includes that rocket's red glare line, right? So that's our national anthem. Basically, national pride's a big deal as a result of this war. And of course, Andrew Jackson, who's going to become a president in a few years as a result of this. Last slide. What's the biggest economic change as a result of this war? Well, because of the Napoleonic War and the War of 1812, a trade between America and Europe was really cut down a lot. As a result, Americans were having trouble getting some products. By those products, I do not mean toilet paper and paper towels. What I mean is mostly things like textiles and luxury goods. So the United States was having a hard time getting cloth, basically cotton cloth, which was something that was used in a lot of products. Americans were having trouble getting cotton cloth, which was made almost exclusively worldwide by the British during this time. And so what some entrepreneurs realized during this war is that, America produces a lot of the world's cotton. So maybe Americans could build some factories somewhere and could produce our own cloth from it. And so there's going to be a few people who are going to copy English textile mills, kind of illegally, a little bit espionage-like, and they're going to build those mills over in New England, and New England is now going to start off on an industrial revolution as a result of all this fighting, where the United States is not only going to be producing the raw material for cotton, but they're also going to be producing that cotton into cotton cloth. So that's the beginning of America's industrial revolution, is the fact that we just can't trade like we wanted to with Europe because of all this conflict. So it's the beginning of American industrialism. And to make that work, we're going to see factories starting to build up in the Northeast. We're going to see steamships form to help move products around all those rivers that connect the Eastern Seaboard together, and railroads that will start to connect the East Coast to the rest of what is the United States. So this is all going to be happening as a result of all these wars that have cut America off from Europe and have forced America to start making its own manufactured goods for the first time.